Ever get that feeling where a story just stays with you? Like, even after it's faded from the headlines, something about it lingers.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely cases that stick in your mind.
Right. And for me, the Royal Park murder in Sri Lanka, that's one of those.
Yeah, I could see why. That one had so many twists and turns. It was really brutal. There's political power involved.
It's still unfolding, too. I mean, the legal battle is ongoing.
That's right. It all started back in July 2005, remember, with the murder of Yvonne Jonsson, a 19-year-old Swedish Sri Lankan.
At the Royal Park condominium complex.
Exactly, in Rajagiriya.
Yeah.
And, the thing that makes this case even more tragic is the whole journey it's been through. The Sri Lankan legal system, and even beyond that.
And then you factor in Jude Shramantha Anthony Jayamaha, the guy who was convicted. His family was really influential.
Oh, yeah, very high profile, which just adds this whole other dimension to the story.
Right. So where do we even begin with something like this? For our deep dive today, we're going to focus on three main things. First, we have to look at the details of the murder itself. It's unsettling, but it's important.
We can't shy away from that, absolutely.
Then we'll dig into how politics got involved, specifically how a presidential pardon came about.
Which is a huge turning point.
And lastly, we'll bring it up to date. Like, where's the case stand right now? We've got news reports, background info, even firsthand accounts, really trying to get the full picture here.
The goal is to go beyond the headlines, right?
Yeah.
Unpack all the complexities. It's not just about what happened, but the why and what it means for justice in Sri Lanka.
Okay, so let's rewind back to July 1st, 2005. A housemaid at Royal Park, she makes a discovery that's going to shock the entire country.
It was around 9:30 in the morning. Yvonne's body is found on the stairwell between the 16th and 19th floors.
And the way people describe the scene, chilling. The apartment manager, he even said she looked like a doll.
That really gives you a sense of it, how unnatural it must have been.
Yeah, incredibly disturbing. They identified her pretty quickly. Yvonne Jonsson, daughter of Roger Jonsson. And the details of what happened, it's tough to hear.
It really is.
Her jeans were pulled down to her ankles, and this is the awful part, they were used to strangle her, wrapped around her neck.
The media, they quickly dubbed it the Royal Park murder, which is a name that kind of emphasizes the setting, too. This upscale condo complex. Like, even in those environments, this kind of violence can happen.
So let's back up. The night before, Yvonne was out with her younger sister, Caroline, and Jayamaha. They hit a few spots, White Horse Inn, Glow, then the Blue Elephant at the Hilton Colombo.
Seems like an argument broke out between Caroline and Jayamaha at some point during the night.
And reports say that Yvonne stepped in, defended her sister.
Now, Jayamaha, later on, his defense team painted a slightly different picture, saying the argument was about Caroline talking to someone else, and Yvonne actually took his side.
Wow.
But either way, you can tell there was tension.
Right, so things are already a bit fraught. Now Yvonne heads back to Glow with a friend, while Caroline and Jayamaha, they go back to the Johnsons' apartment building around 2:02 a.m.
And this is where the timeline really matters. Yvonne gets back to Royal Park at about 2:50 a.m.
And it's like everything goes wrong so fast. The attack, it starts almost the second she steps out of the elevator on the 23rd floor.
Where her family's apartment was.
Jayamaha forces her into the stairwell next to the elevator.
You can almost picture the struggle. As they're going down the stairs, she's dropping pieces of clothing, like fighting for her life.
Awful. And then he bashes her head against the edge of a step over and over.
Just brutal. And after that, he drags her body down 4 flights of stairs. That's where they found her, on the steps of the 19th floor. Asphyxiation was the official cause of death.
But it gets worse. He strangled her with her own stretch pants, bent her legs backward to make it into a ligature, and her skull. It had 64 fractures.
It's hard to even fathom that kind of violence.
Now, forensics, they found a partial palm print near her body, in her blood, matched to Jayamaha.
And to make it even more chilling, he admitted to taking a swim in the Royal Park pool after the murder, trying to wash away evidence.
So, after the investigation, the first trial, that was in 2006, right? He's convicted of culpable homicide.
Which is not as serious as a murder charge.
He gets 12 years rigorous imprisonment. But that's not the end of it, is it?
No, the Attorney General wasn't satisfied. They appealed the verdict, wanted a murder conviction. So in 2012, the Court of Appeal, they overturned the original decision. Jayamaha is found guilty of murder, sentenced to death.
Wow.
And then in 2014, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka upholds that decision. At this point, it seems like it's over. Years of legal battles, finally a resolution.
And then just when you think it's settled, 2019, boom, a presidential pardon.
This is where things get really interesting and controversial. It really raises questions about how politics and justice intersect.
So November 9th, 2019, President Maithripala Sirisena, he's in his last week of office, and he grants this pardon to Jayamaha, and people are outraged.
Immediately.
Sirisena's justification was that Jayamaha had been a model prisoner, that he was only 19 when he committed this, quote, incident of impatience.
And that he'd even earned a PhD while he was in prison.
Sirisena also claimed that he was influenced by appeals from several prominent religious figures, Venerable Rathanathero, Venerable Badagama Samithathero, Venerable Dr. Karatawala Punarathana Nayakethero.
They all apparently urged him to grant the pardon.
And Venerable Rathanathero, he seems to have been the key player here. He even brought Jayamaha's family to meet with Sirisena, arguing for the pardon based on Buddhist principles of compassion.
It's interesting, there was also an initial claim that Reverend Raymond Wickramasinghe, the Bishop of Galway, supported the pardon. But he later clarified that his support was for prisoner rehabilitation in general, not specifically for Jayamaha.
The public was furious. Anura Kumara Dissanayake, he called the pardon illegal and unjustifiable.
And even Just Premadasa, who was running for president at the time, he pledged to reverse the pardon if he was elected.
Understandably, Yvonne's family, they were heartbroken by this. Her sister, Caroline Jonsson-Bradley, she condemned the pardon, said Jayamaha never showed any remorse and that the murder was totally planned in advance.
It's important to hear her perspective. This wasn't just some abstract legal case for her. It was her sister.
Caroline talked about how close she and Yvonne were, their dreams, Yvonne wanted to study fashion in London. She even shared her own experiences with Jayamaha. They briefly dated, and she said his behavior even then was concerning.
It's like looking back and seeing red flags.
Caroline also pointed out how Jayamaha lied to her about his intentions that night. He deliberately waited for Yvonne outside the apartment, and the worst part, even after he strangled Yvonne, he didn't stop. He kept attacking her.
That level of rage is terrifying.
And when Caroline was describing the trial, she talked about the 64 skull fractures and her father having to identify Yvonne, his own daughter, after something so horrific. It's just devastating. And she asked this question that really sticks with you. Why has Jayamaha never apologized?
Right. Why not take responsibility?
Now, Jayamaha did release an open letter shortly after he was released. He said he was full of grief, that he never meant to hurt anyone, and that he felt ashamed.
So there's that gesture, at least.
He described his childhood as difficult, said he felt like a disgruntled youth.
Kind of painting himself as a troubled kid.
And he talked about the harsh conditions in prison, the tiny cell, lack of basic facilities. It's a stark contrast to the privileged life he led before.
He's appealing to people's sympathy.
Jayamaha also emphasized how he dedicated himself to education while he was inside. Got degrees from really good schools despite the lack of resources. He's basically saying, look, I've changed, I've rehabilitated myself.
It's a classic redemption narrative.
And he insisted that the pardon wasn't some random act, that it was the result of years of reviews, reports saying he was ready to go back into society. So what do you make of all this?
It's tough. You have to balance the seriousness of the crime with the possibility that people can change, and then throw political influence into the mix. It really makes you think.
Right. And you'd think that pardon would be the end of it. But then in 2024, another twist, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka overturns it.
June 6th, 2024. A huge legal development. The court basically said, nope, this pardon is unconstitutional. They argued that former President Sirisena deliberately violated the Constitution and abused his power by granting it.
Pretty big statement.
Absolutely. It sets a limit on presidential power and upholds the rule of law. The court didn't stop there either. They ordered Sirisena to pay compensation. 1 million rupees to the person who challenged the pardon and 1 million to each of Yvonne's parents.
Wow, so they weren't messing around.
And there's more. The court instructed the Attorney General to start extradition proceedings for Jayamaha. He apparently fled to Singapore back in 2019.
Oh, so he's on the run.
Looks like he may have left after the Supreme Court issued an injunction in November 2019, barring him from traveling abroad. So right now, legally speaking, Jayamaha is a convicted murderer facing a death sentence in Sri Lanka.
But he's not there.
Nope, still at large. So the effort to bring him back to face justice, that's still ongoing. So much back and forth. It must be incredibly draining for everyone involved, especially Yvonne's family.
It's unimaginable. So let's recap. A brutal murder, years of legal proceedings, a death sentence, then a very controversial pardon, and now the Supreme Court steps in, overturns the pardon, and they're trying to extradite the guy. What a story.
This whole case really highlights some big questions about our justice systems, doesn't it? the potential for political influence, the pursuit of justice, how the law interacts with public opinion and personal circumstances. It's fascinating.
It makes you think. And for everyone listening, think about the human side of this. Yvonne's family, their loss, their fight for justice. Think about Jayamaha, his actions, his account of what happened, and then consider the political decisions, the impact they have, and of course, the role of the courts in trying to sort it all out.
It's also worth looking into the whole presidential pardon system.
Right.
How does it work in different countries, and the Sri Lankan legal system specifically. Understanding those things can give you a better grasp of how significant this Supreme Court ruling really is.
This case shows how these high-profile events really stick with us. They challenge us to confront tough questions about justice, accountability, and the consequences of violence. What are your thoughts? There's a lot to unpack here.